went from sugar to sugar. Okay. And I think I formulated the breakup.
I know you and Dave kind of had a bit of a tumultuous relationship off stage. Do you feel like maybe some of that animosity kind of helped fuel the performance? Like maybe you tried to outdo each other?
Dave and I don't think we should improvise our problems because it's only bringing in a personal thing.
On stage, Sam and Dave were electric, two voices in perfect harmony. But off stage, the silence between them spoke volumes.
But he became like the albatross.
The untold truth behind the Soul Man legend isn't just musical brilliance. It's a tale of betrayals, bitterness, and broken bonds.
Did that to ourselves. No blame. You can't put a blame there. We surrounded ourselves with the people to the point that they said, well, I don't think you can do that, Sam.
From years without speaking, to fights over legacy, to lawsuits and rival acts, this is the darker side of one of soul's greatest duos. Sam Moore was born Samuel David Hicks in Miami, Florida on October 12, 1935. Raised in the church, his earliest training came from gospel choirs, which sharpened the piercing tenor voice that later made him unforgettable. Dave Prater, born May 9, 1937 in Ocilla, Georgia, also came from a gospel background. He sang with his church group, the Sensational Hummingbirds, before striking out as a solo act.
Your daddy was a preacher, so I am assuming that
Yes.
church music was your entry into
Yes.
the music world.
Yes.
Their paths crossed in Miami in 1961. Unlike many legendary duos who bonded as friends first, Sam and Dave never became close personally. Their partnership was forged through circumstance and professional ambition. Moore once admitted he never liked Prater much off stage, but together their voices were magic. Sam's high, urgent tenor cut through every arrangement, while Dave's heavier baritone tenor grounded the music. The result was a powerful call and response dynamic that audiences had never heard before. Sam and Dave met while performing in the gospel music scene. Later, they started singing in small clubs in Miami. Initially signed to Roulette Records, they released a handful of singles that failed to gain traction. The turning point came when Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records sent them to Stax Records in Memphis in 1965. This move changed everything. Stax was the epicenter of Southern soul, home to Otis Redding, Carla Thomas, and Booker T and the MGs. The atmosphere was competitive, but it pushed artists to greatness. At Stax, Sam and Dave were paired with Isaac Hayes and David Porter, the songwriting and production team, who became instrumental to their success. Hayes and Porter immediately recognized the duo's potential and crafted material that emphasized their gospel roots and explosive back-and-forth delivery.
We were recording for Roulette Records, and Henry Glover, that was the producer for Sam and Dave at the time, from Roulette.
In 1966, Sam and Dave struck gold with Hold On, I'm Comin'. The track stormed to #1 on the R&B chart and broke into the Billboard Hot 100. It became their signature opening song in concerts, setting the tone for shows that audiences described as near religious revivals. The momentum continued with You Don't Know Like I Know and When Something Is Wrong With My Baby, which showcased a softer, more emotional side. But it was their 1967 single Soul Man that immortalized them. Written by Hayes and Porter and inspired by the phrase, soul being painted on black-owned businesses during the civil rights era, the song became a cultural statement, as well as a hit. It climbed to #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won them a Grammy.
So don't worry, 'cause I'm coming. I'm a soul man. Yeah, I'm a soul man.
Sam and Dave were nicknamed Double Dynamite, and their live shows proved why. Backed by Booker T and the MGs and the Marquis horn section, they delivered sweaty, passionate performances that left crowds stunned. They often dressed alike, moved in sync, and shouted like preachers at a revival. By the end of the 1960s, they had become international stars, touring across Europe and the United States. They influenced countless acts, including the Blues Brothers, who later covered Soul Man. On stage, Sam and Dave looked unstoppable. But offstage, the cracks were already visible, and their personal tensions threatened everything they had built. Even in their peak years, Sam Moore and Dave Prater's relationship was far from friendly. Their professional chemistry was undeniable, but offstage, the two men clashed constantly. Moore later explained that their personalities were completely different. He described himself as disciplined and career-focused, while Prater was more volatile, prone to outbursts, and less predictable. The tension was so deep that, according to Moore, they barely spoke to one another outside of performances. For nearly 13 years, their only communication came through intermediaries. They would travel separately, arrive at concert venues in different cars, and demand separate dressing rooms. This was not the image fans saw on stage, where they danced side by side and traded vocal lines with explosive energy. In reality, it was an act of professionalism covering up personal animosity.
David, I don't think we should improvise our problems because it's only bringing in a personal thing.
One of the most devastating moments came in 1968. That year, Dave Prater was involved in a violent domestic dispute in which he shot and wounded his wife. The incident shocked those around him and cast a shadow over the group's public image. Sam Moore was furious. In later interviews, he revealed the exact words he spoke to Prater. "I'll sing. I'll even record with you. But I'll never talk to you again. Never." Moore kept that vow for years, communicating only through managers, agents, or stage crews. This vow explains the surreal atmosphere of their tours in the 1970s. Audiences believed they were watching a united team, but behind the scenes, they were two men who could not stand each other's company. Many reports described them walking past each other in silence, not exchanging a word, even as they prepared to perform in front of thousands.
But he became like the albatross.
Their disputes weren't only personal, they were also artistic. Sam Moore grew frustrated with being confined to the same catalog of songs. He wanted to experiment with new material and carve out his own identity as an artist. Dave Prater, on the other hand, felt that Moore was undermining their partnership. He accused Moore of being difficult and unwilling to commit to the group's established direction. By the mid-1970s, the constant tension resulted in repeated breakups. Sometimes one man would show up for a show while the other refused. Promoters would scramble to manage the chaos, and on several occasions, Prater performed with replacement singers when Moore walked away. At other times, Moore performed alone, determined not to let Prater's unpredictability stop him from collecting a paycheck. Despite all this turmoil, their stage act rarely faltered in front of the audience. They still delivered electrifying shows, but the truth was that their bond had been permanently broken after the 1968 shooting incident. What fans thought was brotherhood was really just professionalism and a contract forcing two men to share the stage. Even though they performed together, they did not talk when the show was over. For nearly 13 years, they avoided speaking to each other. The situation set the stage for even greater problems. With drugs, legal troubles, and fatigue from endless touring soon taking over their lives, the 1970s would see Sam and Dave unravel even further. By the early 1970s, Sam and Dave's once unstoppable partnership was running on fumes. Behind the curtain of fame, both men were spiraling, but for different reasons. Drugs, fatigue, and years of pent-up resentment turned their tours into a battlefield. Sam Moore, the voice often praised as one of the greatest tenors in soul history, was struggling with addiction. He admitted years later that he had fallen deeply into cocaine and heroin use, a habit that drained both his finances and his reliability. In interviews, Moore explained how the drugs numbed his pain, but also consumed his life. At his lowest points, he would miss rehearsals, show up late to gigs, or isolate himself from everyone around him.
He said, come go with me. Took me right on. Went into one of the stalls in the bathroom, and he had this little package, white powder.
Dave Prater, meanwhile, had his own demons. While less vocal about drug use, he battled volatility and a string of personal crises. Promoters complained that Prater could be unpredictable, and the lingering fallout from his 1968 domestic violence case hung over his reputation. Together, Moore and Prater were still a draw, but behind the scenes, they were a nightmare to manage. What had happened was, in 1968, a terrible event changed everything for the duo. Dave had a fight with his wife. By 1970, their first official split became public. Sam Moore briefly left the act, frustrated with the endless cycle of fights and disappointment. Prater attempted to carry on with replacement singers, but the magic was gone. Audiences wanted Sam and Dave, not Dave Prater and company. The booking slowed, and the financial pressure forced the two men back together. When they reunited in 1972, the pattern only repeated itself. They would tour, fight, break up, and reunite again. By some accounts, they went through at least 4 major breakups in the 1970s alone. One promoter recalled that the duo could barely last a few weeks together before another feud erupted. And yet, because their brand was still strong, they kept getting booked. The demand for their hits, Soul Man, Hold On, I'm Coming, and I Thank You, was too lucrative to ignore.
Well, we try to keep it alive as we possibly can.
The chaos extended to the stage. At times, they were able to deliver electric performances that reminded fans of their Stax Glory days. Other nights, the cracks showed. Accounts exist of missed cues, sloppy routines, and even outright hostility during shows. Still, their reputation as a high-energy act carried them through. The drugs, however, continued to eat away at Sam Moore's career. In later years, he admitted that his addiction nearly destroyed him. He spent much of the decade in a haze, struggling to maintain stability in both his personal life and professional commitments. Sam Moore suffered the most. His addiction lasted for 15 years. He could not escape it. It affected his career, his health, and his personal life. Dave Prater, too, was affected. His frustration with Moore's instability only deepened their rift. By the late 1970s, their tours had devolved into survival rather than artistry. They weren't working together out of brotherhood or even artistic ambition. It was about money. Each reunion was motivated by necessity, not friendship. Their legendary partnership had become a business arrangement between two men who no longer trusted each other. The chaos of the 1970s set the tone for the years ahead. When disco began to dominate the airwaves and the Memphis soul sound lost ground, Sam and Dave faced the challenge of staying relevant in a changing music industry while barely holding themselves together behind the scenes. As the 1980s arrived, Sam and Dave were veterans of the soul scene. Their golden years at Stax were long behind them. Yet, promoters still saw value in reuniting the duo. By this time, nostalgia tours were becoming popular, and acts from the 1960s were being called back to the stage for festivals, casino shows, and package concerts. For Sam Moore and Dave Prater, this meant money and exposure, but it also meant reopening old wounds. Sam and Dave had never resolved the deep bitterness that developed in the 1970s. Instead, they learned to tolerate each other in short bursts when the paychecks demanded it. Their dynamic had shifted from creative partnership to business necessity. Moore later explained that they often went days without speaking to each other, even when they were on the same tour bus or sharing the same hotel. Despite the tension, the duo still had moments of brilliance. Their choreography, built on years of practice, remained sharp, and audiences loved hearing the classics live. A particularly notable high point came when they were invited to perform on European stages, where the appetite for classic soul never really faded. Crowds overseas treated Sam and Dave like legends, and for a time, it looked like the duo might find stability through these tours. But behind the curtain, the same problems persisted. Sam Moore was still battling addiction throughout much of the early 1980s. In interviews, he admitted that drugs nearly cost him his life, and his unpredictable behavior often strained his working relationship with Dave.
The white powder was heroin, and it didn't take long for Sam to get hooked. His habit soon cost him $600 a day.
At the same time, Dave Prater's personal life continued to make headlines for the wrong reasons. In 1987, he was involved in a violent incident that damaged his reputation further. Dave had a fight with his wife. During the argument, he pulled out a gun and shot her. Financial troubles also haunted both men. Unlike some of their peers, Sam and Dave had not managed to secure lasting wealth from their hit-making years. Poor royalty arrangements, management disputes, and their constant breakups meant they often had to rely on touring just to stay afloat. By the mid-1980s, their performances were as much about survival as artistry. Their declining relationship became an open secret. Reporters covering reunion tours often noted how distant the two appeared off-stage. One account from a promoter described how Moore and Prater would arrive separately, rehearse separately, and only come together moments before walking on stage. Once the show ended, they would go their separate ways without a word. In 1986, the pair reunited again for what would become one of their final high-profile tours. It was billed as a revival of their classic act, capitalizing on the ongoing success of the Blues Brothers movie and soundtrack, which had reintroduced soul classics like Soul Man to a new generation. While the tour had some strong nights, the underlying cracks were undeniable. The chemistry that once defined Sam and Dave had become strained and mechanical. As the decade closed, both men were exhausted. Years of disputes, drugs, and instability had taken their toll. While nostalgia kept their names alive, the spark was gone. The 1980s showed the world a version of Sam and Dave that was fractured, two icons locked in a partnership they could not escape, yet no longer truly shared. By the late 1980s, the story of Sam and Dave had reached a breaking point. What began as one of the most explosive soul duos of the 1960s was now reduced to strained reunions, and a partnership kept alive more by obligation than brotherhood. Both men were worn down by years of bitterness, financial instability, and personal battles that never seemed to end. In 1987, things took an especially dark turn when Dave Prater was arrested after another violent incident in his personal life. News of this spread quickly, reinforcing the public image of the duo as troubled figures far removed from their glory days. Sam Moore, meanwhile, was in the middle of his own struggles. His heroin addiction had taken such a toll that many around him doubted whether he would even live into the 1990s. In later interviews, Moore admitted that he narrowly survived several overdoses during this period.
And most of the time, he'd go and get the drug or the dope for you.
Why didn't you die, you think?
Almost did. And
Despite this chaos, the two still found themselves pulled back together. In 1988, they embarked on what would become their last series of reunion shows. These performances were far from the energy of the 1960s. While their voices could still soar on classics like Hold On, I'm Comin', and Soul Man, the tension between them was clear. Promoters and fans noticed that the men often avoided eye contact on stage, going through the motions without the joy that had once electrified audiences. It was also around this time that Dave Prater decided to move forward with a controversial decision. In 1981, after one of their earlier splits, he had begun performing with another singer, Sam Daniels, under the billing The New Sam and Dave Review. Sam Moore strongly opposed this, insisting it was misleading and disrespectful. Legal disputes followed, and although Prater continued with Daniels, the conflict deepened the resentment between the two original members. Then, in 1988, tragedy struck. On April 9th of that year, Dave Prater was driving in Sycamore, Georgia, when he lost control of his car. The crash was fatal. At just 50 years old, one half of the legendary duo was gone. The news shocked fans, but did not come as a complete surprise to those who had followed the turbulent story of Sam and Dave. For many, it felt like an inevitable and tragic conclusion to years of chaos.
April 9th, 1988, Dave Prater's life ended abruptly in a car crash near Sycamore, Georgia. He was only 50 years old at the time.
Sam Moore's reaction to Prater's death was complicated. Although the two had shared decades of music and success, they also shared decades of anger and betrayal. When asked about his passing, Moore acknowledged Prater's role in their success, but made no attempt to hide the reality of their strained relationship. The bitterness between them had run so deep that even death did not erase it. After Prater's passing, the Sam and Dave story entered a new chapter, one marked by memory, tribute, and controversy over legacy. Moore was left as the surviving member, carrying both the glory of their achievements and the scars of their downfall. The death of Dave Prater symbolized the end of an era, but it also raised new questions about how the duo's history would be remembered and who would control the narrative of Soul Man and all it represented. With Dave Prater's death in 1988, the story of Sam and Dave might have ended, but in reality, the years that followed brought new disputes, legal battles, and complicated legacies. Sam Moore became the sole surviving half of the duo, and while he carried their music into new decades, he also carried decades of resentment, lawsuits, and questions about who truly controlled the Soul Man name and history. In the immediate aftermath of Prater's passing, Sam Moore refused to let the memory of their partnership fade. But even here, conflict lingered. Dave Prater's widow, Rosemary, remained deeply connected to her husband's legacy and wanted her share of acknowledgement. This tension came to a head in 1992 when Sam and Dave were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The night was supposed to be a celebration of their impact, but Moore flatly refused to sit at the same table as Rosemary Prater. The bitterness between the two camps remained visible, overshadowing what should have been one of the most important nights of their careers.
All time. Their definitive, instantly singable super hit.
Still, the recognition was undeniable. Their songs, Soul Man, Hold On, I'm Comin', and I Thank You, had become timeless, influencing generations of musicians. In his acceptance remarks, Moore reflected on the music itself rather than his partnership with Dave, an omission that fans and critics noted. The fractured relationship, even in death, remained part of their public story. Moore himself continued to perform well into the 2000s. He collaborated with Bruce Springsteen, Sting, and other major artists, proving that his voice still carried the raw power that had made Sam and Dave famous. He also performed for 6 U.S. presidents, a testament to the respect he commanded as a solo act. But Moore's career was not free of controversy. In 2009, he filed a lawsuit against the producers of the film, Soul Men, a comedy starring Samuel L. Jackson and Bernie Mac. Moore argued that the film was based on his life with Dave Prater and that it exploited their story without giving him proper credit or compensation. The court, however, dismissed the case, ruling that while similarities existed, the movie was not directly connected to Sam and Dave's real history. The dismissal added another frustrating chapter to Moore's long battle over ownership of the duo's legacy. Meanwhile, debates about the use of the Sam and Dave name resurfaced time and again. Fans and industry insiders questioned whether Dave Prater's decision to perform with Sam Daniels as the new Sam and Dave Review had diluted the brand. Others believed that Sam Moore, as the surviving original member, was entitled to full control. The disagreements ensured that the legacy of Sam and Dave remained as complicated as their partnership had always been. By the time Sam Moore passed away in January 2025, he left behind a career that spanned 6 decades. The obituaries highlighted his soaring tenor voice, the timeless hits he created with Dave Prater, and his resilience in overcoming addiction. But they also noted the darker chapters, like the drug use, the violent incidents, the decades of personal conflict, and the lawsuits that kept his name in headlines long after the music stopped.
A man who helped make soul music mainstream has died. Sam Moore passed away in Florida Friday at age 89 from complications while recovering from surgery.
Today, Sam and Dave are remembered as pioneers of soul music, whose live shows set the standard for energy and passion. Yet, their story is also a cautionary tale about how personal struggles, addiction, and bitterness can overshadow even the brightest artistic legacies. Their music remains immortal, but their relationship, fraught, tragic, and unforgettable, defines the untold truth behind the men who sang Soul Man.